Hello, welcome everyone to CRC Music in the Studio. Today we're joined by special guest Usha Srinivasan. But before we begin today's event, we would like to begin with a land acknowledgement. We're going to show a video produced by Cosumnes River College in honor of our 50th anniversary, which was just this past week. So Gabriel Rivera, our technical wizard behind the curtain, will go ahead and cue up that video for us, and then we'll get started.
We acknowledge the land currently occupied by Cosumnes River College as the traditional home of the Miwok and Nisseon people. At its January 2020 meeting, the Cosumnes River College Participatory Governance Council approved the recommendation to formally adopt the use of a land acknowledgement statement that recognizes the original indigenous people of the land where Cosumnes River College has been located 50 years. Through this acknowledgement, Cosumnes River College is showing its respect and gratitude for indigenous people and their enduring relationship to the land.
These sovereign people have been caretakers of the area since time immemorial. The state of California is home to more than 110 federally recognized Indian tribes, representing the most diverse set of tribal nations anywhere in the United States. Despite centuries of genocide and occupation, the Miwok and Nissenan people continue as vibrant and resilient federally recognized tribes, bands, and rancherías.
The waters of the Sacramento, American, and Cosumnes rivers have nourished Miwok and Nissenan tribal communities with culture and dietary sustenance throughout time. Cosumnes of the Cosumnes River derives from the Plains Miwok language, stemming from the words Cosum, meaning salmon, and Umne, meaning place of, translates as the place of salmon.
Today, we celebrate our Miwok and Nisseon tribal neighbors as the ancestral stewards of this land and honor their sustained existence. It is with their blessing and continued guidance that Cosumnes River College seeks to provide an accessible, equitable, and principled institution of learning.
Thank you, Gabriel. Welcome, everyone. So now let's begin. We have our special guest I'm super excited to talk with today, Usha Srinivasan, who is the CEO and co-founder of Mosaic America, a nonprofit arts organization formerly known as Sangam Arts. Welcome so much, Usha. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you. It's such an honor, and it's lovely to see you, and I'm really excited to be here. It's really a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So Usha and I've known each other for many years now. I was more often, and now I'm still occasionally a grant writer for Mosaic America.
Yeah, I'm very grateful for the work you do for us.
Oh, well, you all are awesome. So why don't you tell us a little bit about Mosaic America? What does your organization do?
Yeah, so Mosaic America is an organization based here in Silicon Valley, and our mission is to help move American communities, more specifically here in Silicon Valley, but hopefully beyond at some point, to move communities that are diverse from diversity to inclusion to belonging. And later on in my presentation, I'll talk a little bit more about exactly what the issue is, what the social issue is that we are experiencing, and how we use the arts as a way to kind of make incremental changes towards improving the situation, to finding a solution and creating belonging.
Awesome.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that sounds great. Um, so I understand you have some materials to share with us.
Yes, yes.
Cool. Yeah.
So yeah, so if it's okay with you, I can kind of dive into a few slides that I've created. And again,
Yeah.
what I'm hoping to accomplish today is to really talk about the power of arts to create social change, and the power of arts to animate and sustain social movements, both small and large. So hello, everybody. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I'm excited to see all of you on here. Please feel free to kind of drop in your questions as I go along. I'll be happy to answer them, or maybe Lisa will. So, we all kind of know about art obviously has the ability to make an impact on people personally and otherwise. When you attend an arts event or you look at a work of art, it touches you on an emotional level. It might even transport you to a different place. And so art has always, we know the impact of the art. Art can also just be for art's sake. The notion that art does not really need to serve any kind of utilitarian purpose or have some, didactic or moral political imperative behind it. So you can just do art for art's sake, and there's definitely merit to that. But what I'm here to share with you is about, how powerful the arts can be beyond creating kind of, aesthetically pleasing experiences. And especially at this point in our country's history, at this point where we find ourselves, I think arts can be really powerful vehicle for bringing about real meaningful change for a better America for all of us. So with that context, I'm going to share a few slides. And I have to be honest, I haven't timed myself. So I'm going to try and kind of wrap up the slides in like maybe 20 minutes at the most. So I'll leave enough time at the very end for conversation. I also have to say that, all of what I'm presenting to you today is really rooted in my own experience being kind of this entrepreneur, if you will. I'm not an artist by training. I'm a hobby artist. I come from the high-tech world. But I am now very much in the nonprofit space, operating at the intersection of culture and community. But everything that I share with you is just based on my observances and experiences. It's not rooted in, academic research or scholarship. So just that. With that, I'm going to go ahead and start sharing. And here we go.
Cool.
Okay. I hope everybody's able to see the slides.
Yeah, looks good.
Okay, good. So again, my name is Usha Srinivasan. I'm the co-founder of and CEO of an organization called Mosaic America, which until recently was called Sangam Arts. So we all know, we've all experienced the power of the arts. And, American history is replete with examples of arts that have really moved people, have enacted change in a very dramatic way. Art has been used to break stereotypes. You look at Rosie the Riveter, and, while the men were off fighting a somewhat unpopular war somewhere else on a different continent, this image of Rosie the Riveter really inspired a whole generation of women to kind of go into the workforce. And in some ways, this was kind of the start of the feminist movement in America. We know the Vietnam War, the unpopularity of it had to do in some part with kind of visual images and powerful works of art, protest art, if you will, to kind of really humanize the issue, the toll that it was taking. And it really helped people, make up their minds about this. And of course, more recently, I think we've seen that, like the art that you see on the right side, we use art to kind of get people to think about what it means to be America and American differently. So these are all examples we've all seen. We've also seen kind of the role of art, whether it's performance art, song, dance, poetry, in social movements for change. So whether that is For example, the Harlem Renaissance movement was for the first time, it allowed people all over the world to see Black Americans in a way that they wanted to be seen, this is a movement that allowed those artists to express themselves, create works that were important to them, that reflected their lived experiences. And it is widely believed that that is kind of tied to then the civil rights movement, and where how that movement evolved. The feminist movement had a lot of folk songs and chants that were part of it. You think about "We shall overcome," slogans like "No justice, no peace." You could argue that pretty much any movement would be less impactful if you didn't really have kind of arts as a vehicle for kind of exhorting people, motivating them, harmonizing activists, reinforcing their values and ideas, setting the emotional tone for the movement, and also kind of, mythologizing leaders and, creating these great personas that kind of become legends. So
Right.
definitely a lot of amazing power lies in the arts to impact social change. So now, that just to provide that context, but now I want to talk more specifically about how we at Mosaic America came to use the arts and what kind of change we are trying to achieve. So like I said, we're based here in Silicon Valley. I myself was very much in the high-tech world. But as a new immigrant, I was experiencing what many immigrants do, is kind of this introspection about what is my identity, am I an Indian American? Am I American enough? Are some people more American than others? My kids are all born and raised here, and yet we kind of live in our little hyphenated silos, and so all of these thoughts led me to realize that what I was experiencing here in Silicon Valley was a lack of sense of belonging, a lack of sense of community, which wasn't that important to me as long as I was very much focused on career or an education. But now that I had kids, I was like, okay, where's the community? I want to raise my kids in a village. Where's the village? And you realize, oh my God, there's not. Now, so to give you a little context about Silicon Valley, we are the cutting edge of this demographic shift that at some point is going to play out in other places in America. But in Silicon Valley, because we transformed over the past 40 to 50 years from essentially an agricultural center to a global technology hub. So in 40 to 50 years, we have really gone from having orchards and canneries to now essentially being kind of this high-tech hub. And what that has meant is it has changed the requirements of what kind of workforce we need, what kind of labor we need. And so in this process of transforming, we've seen demographic shifts that have been very profound. When I first arrived here to go to business school in 1995, we were still about 2/3 white in Santa Clara County, which is where Silicon Valley is located. Today, fast forward, we are a majority minority community, and that trend towards diversity is just continuing to accelerate, right? With people like me coming from faraway lands. Interesting statistics, Santa Clara County has about 78% of the county citizens were born elsewhere. A good 48% were born overseas. And a vast majority of them have lived here less than 20 years, which means we don't really have roots in the community, right? And so when you have this kind of massive change, you also see the development of cultural silos. Now, what do we mean by that? It is basically this phenomenon where people of a shared ancestry tend to kind of live and eat and play and pray with people that look most like themselves. I mean, it's natural human tendency to want to feel like you belong. And one way you can feel like you belong in what is essentially a foreign land at first is to just surround yourself with people that make you feel like you belong. And so, but what happens with these cultural silos in a place like Silicon Valley is you see the Indian Americans live their own lives among themselves, the Chinese Americans do the same. We may transact with each other at work, We may forge some very expedient alliances for politics or commerce, but we're not having meaningful interactions as fellow community members. So that's, and that leads to all kinds of tribalization. And as a result of both of these phenomena, we actually now no longer have a shared vision for the future. A recent survey that was conducted showed that a big percentage of those that live in Silicon Valley right now do not foresee themselves living here in 20, 25 years. Some of that has to do with the cost of living. Some of that has to do with the fact that the people that have been here for generations, their kids can no longer afford to live here. They've moved out. The cost of, housing, everything has gone up. For all of those reasons, we kind of in Silicon Valley, from my standpoint, living this kind of dystopian existence where there is a lot of wealth on the one hand, but there's also other communities that are kind of starved for wealth. And there's this inequality in not just in income, but in access to resources. But above all, we just don't feel like we're members of the same community, that we all belong to something bigger than ourselves. So that was the problem that I felt very acutely myself. But it's not something that I just came up with. Berkeley's Othering and Belonging Institute has done extensive research over the last 40 to 45 years. And they find that the Silicon Valley and the Greater Bay Area is more segregated today than it was 50 years ago, 40 years ago, racially and ethnically segregated today. This is a measurable fact. And like I said, so, when you have people who do not have a shared understanding of the history of the land, they don't have shared experiences in the present because we're all busy living in our silos, then we don't have a shared vision for the future. And that leads to kind of disharmony. It's really a recipe for tribalization, fragmenting, for people just wanting to look after their own, each one for themselves. And I think we can all agree that not only does it kind of represent a serious dysfunction, it is kind of a phenomenal failure to realize the true potential of America, the glory of America, right? And that is, to us, is a problem. So when I started this organization called Sangam Arts, I was still very much thinking about it from a very Indian diasporic centric mindset. How can I bring Indian arts to the mainstream? But very soon after, I realized there was nothing inherently different about the Indian community's experience here. Every immigrant community or every culturally distinct group here in Silicon Valley has its own unique forms of cultural expressions, very diverse, some of them very ancient, almost all of them being practiced here by American-born artists, people that were born and raised here. They just happen to be practicing their arts from faraway lands because that's their ancestry, right? So that was when I came up with the idea, or with my partner Priya Das, of Mosaic. The idea behind Mosaic is America is no longer a melting pot. It is a mosaic. We can't just expect all of us from many different places to, in this crucible of democracy and freedom, just melt into a uniform American identity. That flawed, outdated model of integration has resulted in kind of the African Americans, the indigenous and immigrants of color being kind of relegated to these hyphenated fringes, if you will, with the default American identity being associated largely with white Americans. And that is no longer true. And so the idea is not that we all come together and become indistinguishable from each other. What we should say is being American does not require to look or eat and play or love a certain way, but all it requires is that you embrace American values, equality, liberty, justice, all of those wonderful things. You can come as you are. It doesn't matter what you look like, you're still American. So that's kind of the idea behind Mosaic. Mosaic is, think about it, there's little tiles. Each one is different. Each one is a different size and texture. Each one is beautiful on its own, but it's a picture that we create together that is even more glorious. And that is what we need to do as Americans, is create these mosaics in our communities. So how do we do this, right? So backing up, we see Mosaic as a grassroots movement to help American communities move from diversity to belonging, and to kind of create a strong sense of national identity that does not rely on people looking or eating or praying a certain way. And we do this through the arts. So it's a movement, and we believe that the way to kind of animate and drive this movement forward is through the arts. So we use arts, especially multicultural arts from every community, to create shared experiences that tie us to place, that create awareness of history, important chapters in history, so that we may then develop a shared sense for the future. And that will be a time when we all feel like we can belong. So that's a vision behind Mosaic America. So kind of again, just diving deeper into this. I know this is a boring chart, but I think it's important to understand how we work. So, in every community, you have people who are musicians and dancers and spoken word poets and theater artists. And when you have these cultural silos, whether in Indian, Chinese, and Mexican, Filipino, those artists exist within the silos. The problem is that they're creating works and consuming works within the silos. And as we get more diverse, the audience for each of those artists and art forms becomes increasingly fragmented, right? So you're talking about, smaller and smaller slivers of a pie. So what we do is we look at these artists and we see them as culture bearers, as ambassadors for their communities and culture. And we connect with them, we curate works, we fund projects, provide resources for rehearsing, for whatever they might need, to create works that bring artists together, give them time and space to collaborate over a period of time and co-create works in a manner that that is rooted in respect and in equality. So, it's not a gig, I'm the producer, I'm going to give you some money, you come and perform for me. No, it's about, let's come together. Let's figure out what it is that we're trying to create. Are we trying to tell a story, for example, about the Japanese American internment? How can we tell it? We can tell it through music and multimedia. What kind of music? Well, we can use any kind of instrumentation if you have the right kind of composers who can envision it. So then you bring these artists from different communities, they work over a period of time, learn each other's stuff, they figure out the common threads that bind them, and then they're able to create works. Now you have this work, which is powerful. It has great artistic merit. It involves artists from different communities. What do you do with it? Do you present it at a theater? Unless you're Shen Yun, you don't have enough money to attract an audience these days, especially for something like this, which is not well established, right? So what we do with this is we take the art to where people live their lives. And where do people live their lives? People you obviously live at home, live your life as an individual. You may have some online communities, sadly, increasingly people are trying to find community online. But then you also have, people going to schools, they go to work, they go to performance venues, to parks, libraries, houses of worship. Those are all places in which an individual interfaces with the community. And it is at those interface points that we then present these works. So that when people are going around the library, Saturday afternoon, you're taking your kid to the library to get some books. And guess what? You suddenly see this program that is featuring, Chinese, Indian, Western music, all coming together in harmony. And, suddenly you see, okay, they reflect my community, right? So that is the kind of work we do. So we bring artists together to create works that have import beyond just an aesthetic experience. And then we take it to people where they are. And over time, with these repeated interfaces, these repeated experiences, people will hopefully start seeing things in a different light. And I can tell you that from after 4 years of programming, we have seen this work. Every event we present, people come up to us afterwards like, I had no idea, wow, these look so different on the surface, but then flamenco and Indian Kathak shared common roots. They both use percussive foot movements. On the surface, you would think, what do they have in common, right? So I think it's that kind of activity to us has been a tremendously successful movement so far, and we've received a lot of amazing support at the city, state level, foundation grants, and so on. And another thing is we make all of our programming free because it is important to us that we reach people where they are and make our programming accessible. So it's all free. Here are 3 examples of programs that we have commissioned and presented. You saw the land invocation at the beginning of the event. One of the things that I realized is that the Ohlone, who are the native indigenous to this land that I live in, they are all around us, and yet people just tend to just think about them as a culture that was decimated and gone. And so one of the things we are doing is we have this thing called a Hummingbird Circle, which is a 4-hour community event that brings the Ohlone culture bearers to offer workshops on regalia making, bone rattles, necklaces, grass skirts. And then we all come together, we learn about the cuisine, we learn about the history, we learn about it from the culture bearers themselves, not from textbooks that were written by people who conquered, but by the authentic culture bearers. So that's one example. We have other examples. For example, we had a program that that was commissioned and composed by Van An Vo, who is an Emmy award-winning, legendary, kind of traditional Vietnamese musician. And she created this soundscape of telling the story of African American, Chicano, and Vietnamese communities in the Santa Clara Valley. They were the ones that really helped build the valley for people like me to come in and thrive, and yet that history is not well known. And then on the right, as I alluded to before, the Japanese American internment. A lot of people like me who are recent immigrants do not know the history. And it is important for us to pay homage to that, to kind of acknowledge it and make sure that the bad chapters don't repeat. And so, so far we've done this programming largely in the Bay Area. We've represented a lot of different cultures. The list continues to grow. We have over 40 partner organizations. One thing that we realized, and I'm going to go back in the slides here a bit, if you look on the right-hand side, the museums, the communities, the parks, when we approached them and said, we want to bring our programming to you, we thought they would tell us, well, okay, you need to pay us to host your events. We were very pleasantly surprised that all of them are desperate for events like this that bring the community together. Because, a lot of these venues, especially libraries and community centers, traditional performance venues, and museums especially, were experiencing an erosion in their patron base as the population was changing. And so when we showed up there and said, we will bring you a diverse audience, they're like, wow, let us pay you to do this. So, there's something beautiful about kind of this system that we've created where we're able to nurture artists, we're able to aggregate audiences, we're able to deliver value to these community centers, all the while building belonging. So and without really needing to sell tickets, right? So it's a good, wonderful system. And here is just a small slice of the kinds of artists we present. These are our fellows, and they're all local master artists from different cultures. But they're more than just performers. These are people that believe in the power of the arts to connect people. And not only do they know their own art and culture and the history well, they also understand how it translates to others, how it relates to other cultures. And as a result, they're able to collaborate with each other more easily and create these wonderful mosaics. So before I go here, one of the things I want to mention about some of the work that you will see is really about intercultural collaborative works that we've done over the past 4 years. The advantage to being an American musician, even if you're playing art forms from faraway lands, is most of them, people born and raised here, if they choose to become musicians, can read and write music. That is a powerful thing because it allows people to collaborate. It allows, Ray Furuta, who is a concertizing soloist with the Western flute, to bring together the pipa, the cello, the zither, oud, any number of instruments, because now all of these instrumentalists and musicians read music. So oftentimes we will commission works where sometimes they do a lot of the composing remotely. They get together periodically if they need to understand the context and of course build trust. But that is a uniquely American advantage, if you will. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so now I am going to share a video of kind of a little roundup, if you will, of programming that we've done over the past 4 years. So just bear with me as I bring that up.
Now we've learned about it. Now we can see it.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's see.
And as you're getting your video clip, I'll just share that I really appreciated, when I've collaborated on Sangam grant proposals, it's really amazing being able to see a project from its initial spark, the idea, right? And then getting the artists together to talk about it, and then forming the grant proposal where you have to put all your cool ideas into concrete language, and then watching it, then take life, and then going to attend the performance. It feels really amazing. So
yeah, no, absolutely. All right, I'm going to share. Hopefully you're able to see the screen I'm sharing. Here we go.
Perfect. Yeah, we can see it.
Oh, yeah, let me start here from the beginning. Yeah.
Although the order did not identify any particular group, it was almost exclusively used to incarcerate Americans of Japanese descent.
Right.
So awesome. Usha, could you tell us a little bit about some of the events we saw featured in the video?
Yeah, so there were a series of events that were festivals. For example, there was one at the Montalvo Arts Center. They had a um, summer festival that they launched their exhibit. There's a residency, Lucas Arts Residency, which is a visual art program. They launched this big exhibits. Now, a few dance clips that you saw were from the first Silicon Valley Folk Festival that showcased about 120 dancers from 13 different traditions. And one of the things that we realized when we were putting this festival together is how much we share in common. Many of the for example, the Filipino folk dancers, the Scottish Highland dancers performed pieces that really were about, originally the pieces were, the folk art forms were about keeping men fighting fit. So Scottish Highland dancing and Filipino folk dancing of a certain kind had that in common. So, you have harvest performances, you have, rituals that celebrate lives, and memorialize people. So we were able to create a festival that was entirely intercultural. You saw, for example, the Mexican folklorico dancers come in, and then they were joined by Bhangra dancers from Punjab, and they all created great stuff together. And what you saw out in the plaza was all very, instant, spontaneous celebration of the artists after they'd finished performing. And to me, those are the experiences people don't have. You just are out there doing your own thing. You seldom see these people come together. So I think it's, yeah. And you saw one of the programs that I would like to talk about was the sitar, the pipa, and the cello. The sitar is an Indian classical instrument. The pipa is a Chinese instrument originally. And then, of course, we have the cello. We curated that program and commissioned it specifically for this town that I live in, which is Saratoga. Saratoga has people of Indian, Chinese ancestry. And then, of course, we have our white community, and they seldom get together, except if it is for something to do with the schools or to protest, tax some water bill increase or something like that. So this program brought together those musicians to create works, to create a piece of music that included musicians from those cultures. When people came, they were only familiar with one instrument. Like the Indians came there to see the sitar, the Chinese came there to see the pipa, but then they were like, oh my God, I can't believe these three can create such beautiful harmony together.
Yeah.
So.
And they really do. That was a really beautiful event.
Yeah.
And I love what you mentioned too about, when you were approaching these venues, you thought, okay, well, you were like, let's take this music to people, right?
Correct.
Rather than have them come to some,
Yes.
special event center. Where do people go? Let's bring the music to where they are. That's really powerful. But then also when you approach those places like museums and libraries, there was a need, right?
Yeah.
There was a need for programming. There was a need, help us bring community members here so we can serve those communities. And
Yes.
what better way to do that than through music
Absolutely.
and dance?
Yeah.
Yes.
And absolutely. So, I think it's a very powerful way to kind of engage community. I think there is a need for it. And as some of our attendees are remarking here, we can create something beautiful. There is a hunger in every community. I think a lot of times people silo themselves, not because they don't want to interact with others, but because it's kind of you're not sure if you'll be accepted. You want to be part of the bigger community. We all want to be all American, not hyphenated Americans, but we just are not sure. By creating these opportunities, I think people just see that there is a better way. There is a way for us all to come together, as somebody said here, to stop the divisiveness, to see the beautiful stuff that we can create together. So, each one of these art forms is beautiful on its own, but imagine what we can do if we can come together, right? And that to me is the promise of America. And we all have, all of you on this call that are musicians or practice art in some way, even if you're a hobby artist, you all have the power to use art for something like this. So, the last slide I have, and I don't need to make this main slide, I do want to actually talk about, kind of summarize this, if you will. The only way in a changing America for arts to thrive, any art form to thrive, is by growing audiences. Unlike Europe, where a lot of governments support artists and do a good job of it, over here, the arts are not well funded by the government. They're largely driven by audiences. And even if you're getting a sponsorship, the sponsorship is driven by how much your reach is. So it's important that we continue to find ways to grow the pie rather than squabble and quibble over ever decreasing slices of the pie. So growing the pie means attracting a larger audience than you could do on your own. Right? By bringing the sitar and pipa and cello together, you are now bringing three communities together, which will grow your audience. So that's one thing. Look for opportunities um, to to deploy your art to bring about social change. It can be anything. Social change doesn't have to be huge. It doesn't have to be massive. Little things, right? Just getting somebody to kind of drop a stereotype. Get them to see a community in a different way because of the way you present your art. And also, like I said, think expansively about American art. At its core, our movement is about redefining what it means to be American so that we can all see ourselves as American, regardless of our accents, our ancestry, our status, our immigration status. We are all here and we all belong. And then the other thing is look beyond the differences. You saw the flamenco dancer dancing with the traditional Bharatanatyam dancer on. Again, you don't be put off by how different they are. See the beauty of what they can create together. And then the other thing, which is very important to understand, is there are no shortcuts to this work. Creating this kind of collaborative work takes time, and it is very important to keep in mind that these arts all originated in different times, some of them centuries ago, in different cultures. They don't all fit into one model. You have to allow for the fact that they may need different things. They emphasize different things. I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I presented all 8 classical Indian dance forms at a festival. And one of the dance forms we presented was by this master traditional artist from Southern India, who's highly decorated. And this is actually a dance theater form called the Kathakali, right? And the Kathakali is something that, there's elaborate costumes, dress, bustle, makeup. The dancer spends hours getting ready. And then the dancer will spend with a big live ensemble, will perform at a temple. And it is an all-night performance. And through the night, the dancer will basically play different characters. And each character is so nuanced. The dancer relies on using the face, the muscles of the eyebrows, the little subtle movements to tell stories. It's very highly stylized. But when I presented the person at this festival, they forced us to make this dancer present something in 8 minutes. And they wanted the dancer to move around because the festival was so into they're like, our audience wants to see formations. They want to see movement. They want to see using space. And worst of all, they refused to highlight the face with lighting. They said, that's not our lighting aesthetic. We will not do it. Again, that tells you that, by including those artists in your festival, you were certainly diverse, but you did not actually include them, and they did not feel like they belonged. So it's very important to keep that in mind. Allow for other people to help you collaboratively create something, even if it takes time. It is so worth it. You will learn so much. You will form bonds that will kind of stand the test of time. And, it will just enrich your life. So I'm going to stop talking. I don't know if anybody has any questions. I've been yammering away.
Chuckles and Chuckle Day, Usha, that was so great. And I really like the point that, all the points you made this whole time, but also just now, when we think about, okay, let's create, some sort of event where we're celebrating different cultures, right? Unfortunately, what we often see is kind of a very surface level engagement
Yeah,
that doesn't engage with the artist, doesn't, give them the microphone, right?
correct.
Provide them the platform. And in a way that almost it does more harm than it does
Yes,
good, because you ruin that potential beautiful relationship.
yes,
And
yes,
also, you don't give your audience the type of event where they're really engaging in a meaningful way with the
yeah,
artist,
correct.
like when you were talking about some of these mosaic events, and I've been to them, so I know, you know, as an audience member, you're there, it's entertaining, it's, engaging all of your senses, but you're really engaging with the music that oftentimes is new
Yeah,
to you or can be new to you on a really deep level, right? And sometimes taking something like, flamenco and taiko and combining them together, you really start to lock in on these, musical elements or visual elements, and are able to engage with the performance in this really meaningful
yeah,
way that you
yeah.
wouldn't be able to before. So,
Absolutely. That's a very good point. I think, the art that you create has to obviously be something that honors and respects the artists and their traditions. But it's also, eventually all art is about evoking an emotion in the audience, right? It's certainly about kind of passing on. Sometimes it's about awareness, it's about other things. Especially performance art is about evoking an emotion. And artists take a lot of time and put in a lot of effort, whether it's a musician or a dancer, to kind of make sure that they're able to convey that emotion. So the with that being the goal, sometimes when you force yourself to kind of be constrained by format or by finances or other things, you kind of shortchange both the artist and the audience. And you're right in that you do more harm, because sometimes what happened with this festival example I told you about, because the festival would not allow the artist to explain what the artist was trying to do, they would not illuminate the face. The music that the artist was performing to was, and the lyrics were in a language the audience didn't understand. So they were bewildered, right? There's this person in the middle of the screen who's sitting there and doing things with his eyebrows. They just don't understand it. They got panned by the audience, which you can imagine what that does to an artist, right? And then the audience is going to go away saying, I saw Kathakali, it sucked, right? Because and I'm never going to see that again, right? So I think it's just important for us to be sensitive about that. And the one other thing that I will say is there's a lot of kind of uh, inclusion and diversity for the sake of somehow kind of feeling like you're doing the right thing, you're including people, but it's a check off item, right? And a lot of times in performance art, um, with these culturally rooted arts, they're regarded as kind of ethnic and traditional and separate. And so when I talk about building movement, building belonging using multicultural arts, people assume that that we are talking about everybody but white. Somehow multicultural has come to mean people of color only, or everybody but white. And that's not true at all. Like when you think about the mosaic, you cannot have a mosaic with big chunks missing. And I'm trying, everybody is a valid part of the mosaic and they belong. So I think that that's the other thing. This sometimes the culturally rooted arts, especially multicultural arts, has been viewed as we have the mainstream arts and then there is this other thing, and it's either or. And it's important for us to kind of come from a place of we all belong. Together we are going to create. And you're going to be, respectful of each other, but we are all equal. And that's very important. And sometimes that doesn't exist because the power imbalance historically has been there. But we can all make movements towards rectifying it. So if you are in a position to commission works or to kind of hire somebody to play as part of your work, take the time to understand them, give them some agency, and you will marvel at how you can go in there with some ideas and you say, okay, I'm going to pay you money and here's what you do perform this. If instead you allow them to weigh in and to contribute, the product that you create will be vastly superior.
that ties in
Oh,
so perfectly to the question, one question we have about Mosaic Fellows.
yes.
And And then I also have a question about volunteering.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to drop in here an email that you can send if you want to volunteer. We actually have volunteer open houses that we do once a month. And you, don't be confused by the email ID, which is Sangam Arts, because we are in the process of switching over to Mosaic. So if you send us an email and tell us you're interested in volunteering, we will send you an invitation to one of our open houses, and then you'll know about all the opportunities. In terms of the fellows, the Mosaic Fellows have, right now, the program is focused on those people that we have actually presented multiple times, that have proven and their commitment to creating mosaics. But that said, we are always looking for new artists who have ideas, so just if you're interested, again, you can send a note to info@Sangam Arts and say, here's my practice, here's my art. Because one of the things we could do is include you in a project that a fellow is leading, right? I know, Lisa, you've played in a project or two for Ray, right?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's definitely opportunities. And hopefully someday we may bring Mosaic to where you are, right? And because there is a Mosaic to be created everywhere. There's a Mosaic to be created in colleges, in corporations, many different environments. It's really kind of like, said, a movement, and we'd love for you all to join the movement.
Yeah, shoot, everybody, let's do Mosaic CRC.
I would
Let's
love
talk
that.
about it. Let's
Love
do
that.
it. Yeah.
Yes, let's do it. Let's do it.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yeah, folks, if you have any more questions, please let us know in the chat. Or folks watching on YouTube, you can leave a comment to ask us a question. I think there's a question bar. Yeah, let's see. I'm so riled up and so excited. But
Me
maybe
too.
before I jump in and ask a million questions, let's see. Oh, I don't know. They're all so good. I mean, you've given me so much to think about. I think maybe one thing I'll ask, because you've given us all so much to think about and so much great advice, not just for students, but musicians and artists and people at all stages of career and
Yeah.
life. If how, let's say someone, really appreciates the arts, right? But maybe they aren't a practicing musician, or they're just kind of getting started, but they're bought in. They see, the power of art to bring us together in the present and to reimagine our future. How can those folks get involved?
That's a great question. Most arts organizations or people that are, whether it's nonprofits or otherwise, they're all driven largely by a volunteer core. We have no paid employees. We have a group of very dedicated volunteers, some part-time contractors, but largely we are driven by volunteers. And these are volunteers who have an interest in art, are hobby artists. Some of them are professional artists. I know that Lisa's volunteered for us and done some amazing work with grant writing. But so how you can contribute is, volunteer. If you want to volunteer with us, that's fantastic, but there are a lot of other organizations, so you can volunteer. And that can be many different things. It could be something like, even on the day of an event, being there to kind of usher people, check people in, conduct surveys, what have you. You could help fundraise, of course, that's important. You can serve on the board of organizations, which is, again, we all need good board members that are willing to roll up their sleeves and do some important work. The other thing is you can advocate for the arts. Arts advocacy is incredibly important because, unfortunately, like I said, in America, arts is looked at as like the cherry on top of the cake, right? But really, it is what makes the cake palatable, right? It needs to be baked into the cake, not the cherry on top, right? So what happens when you think about something as a cherry on top? You're like, it's the last thing that gets put on. It's a nice to have. It's not a must have. Well, it's advocacy that really helps people change that. In the recent COVID times, the arts advocates in California has several arts advocacy organizations. I'm part of several of them. We had to go out there and fight for people to see artists as the second line kind of workers, if you will. Also, arts displaces artists. So, I mean, artists are displaced by gentrification, cost of living, all of that stuff. So anything you can do to show up, let's say in your city hall, when there's a new development, and demand to ask what accommodations are they making for artists, because they never get included in these. There's a big company willing to write a big check, and they come there and they draw up plans, and they're dropping a big old campus in the middle of town. Maybe they generate some employment and some taxes, but guess who they displace? They displace artists. And displacing an artist versus displacing somebody, some other kind of worker, is very different. Sometimes that artist is the only flamenco dancer in that whole town. That artist is the only, French horn player, right? And when you lose that person, you lose so much more than just one employee. And so I think we need to kind of go out there and advocate for the artists, fight for arts education in your schools, for your kids. And I think we all, I come from an immigrant community that also is very much driven by achievement, and achievement is very narrowly defined. I would never have gone to engineering school if I had my withers about me. Like, I was just like, that's the only way to make a money, right? We need to encourage arts in our kids. We need to kind of create, because, arts may not be the best way of making a living, but it's what makes life worth living, So I think we just need to kind of, if you feel strongly about it, there's many ways in which you can kind of go advocate for it.
Yeah, awesome. That's really inspiring.
No, seriously. I mean, I worked in high tech for 20 years almost. And, I ran big divisions, but I gotta say that I'm saddened sometimes when I see artists, because of how society views them or values them, kind of doubt their worth and their power to change lives. Which is something that I never felt I could do. I feel like I've done more through Mosaic in 6 years than I did in my 25 years before then working in high tech. That's just me. But I think that we want artists to feel like they have tremendous power, and they do. So,
thanks. And one last question in our Q&A. A question for those of us scared of the new bad A word, appropriation. How do you ensure that you are honoring cultures and traditions instead of appropriating them?
Yeah, I think it is, that's a very, very good question. And, I think a lot of people, and in some ways, I kind of feel my white brothers and sisters are at a special disadvantage when it comes to this, right? I feel a lot more culturally competent to deal with artists because I think by default, being a person of color puts me in a slightly different kind of bucket, if you will. But really, but I use the same principles anybody does. I don't pretend to know anything, right? I go with a humble, open mind and a learner, beginner perspective. So you tell me, right? Also, let's not, again, it's sometimes we feel the need to use shortcuts. I'll give you an example. A while ago, one of our interns was trying to promote an event that had to do with rituals around death and dying, and it was a Day of the Dead celebration. And the post that he created said, Dia de los Muertos is the Mexican Halloween. No, it's not. There's no need for you to kind of immediately try to kind of dumb it down or use shortcuts, because in that one word, that one sentence, right, you're immediately kind of saying this is the gold standard and everything else has to relate to that. And it kind of, you lose a lot of the richness, you lose the context. So there's no shortcuts to it. But what I would feel is like, if you go with an open heart and mind, and you have to be willing, as Lisa said, to hand the microphone to them. You need to take a step back. When I'm working with the Olani, my job is to go find the money and get the hell out of the way, right? My job is not to curate and tell them, here's what, you need to be doing, No, I give them the money so they can go up and down the coast. They can find the abalone shells, the dogwood bane, whatever they need to do. They tell me what they want and I make it available. And I learn in the process. You cannot represent somebody else. Yeah, we'll all make mistakes. We'll say silly things. We may do things. When you do something wrong, admit it. and apologize for it. And most people will find it in their hearts to forgive you. But I think what's hard is the only place where appropriation becomes an issue is when there is a power imbalance, when you control the resources and you control access. And then you're trying to take something that's not yours. People will then call you out for it. If you're willing to share, in fact, even better, hand over resources, right? Because they've been deprived, you make space for them. Then, even if you make mistakes, people will kind of say, that's okay. We get, you are an ally. I hope that answered the question.
I think that beautifully answered the question. Yeah, and thank you also for touching on really like what appropriation, is. And oftentimes it's using someone else's work or heritage and profiting off of it in some way, and that can be either monetarily or in terms of status, right? And so yeah, I especially like to do for your job with Hummingbird Circle. You go
Yeah.
out, you secure the grant funding,
Yeah.
and then
Yeah,
hand
because
it
that's
over.
what they need the most, right? That's what they need the most. They don't have the ability to kind of go out there, write big grants. We do. And so this is what we do. And actually our vision for the Hummingbird Circle is, just like every event nowadays starts with a land invocation and land acknowledgement, we hope that we can go one step further, because sometimes the land acknowledgement, first of all, it's always a good idea, but if that's all you do when you can do more, then that becomes more performative, right? That's kind of like virtue signaling or whatever, right? If you can do more, if you can host a 4-hour festival once a year and you are a county government, you should do that, right? And so our hope is to kind of make the Hummingbird Circles a fixture and an annual event. My kids, when they were in, I guess you learn about the Ohlone and the mission, I think 3rd and 4th grade or 4th and 5th. They learn about it from textbooks, from teachers who've never met an Ohlone person themselves. We want them to learn firsthand from the culture bearers, right? And this is a great opportunity. So our hope is that it becomes something that's more widely embraced. And then we're going to just let the Confederation of Ohlone people own it. Our job is to kind of incubate it, to make sure we provide all the resources and create the right environment for it to take root. But then after that, it is theirs to own and run. And
Awesome. Oh gosh. Thanks so much, Usha.
Thank
Thank you
you.
to everyone. I believe we have a closing treat. I think
Yes,
is that right, Usha? Yeah. So,
that would be great. Yeah.
yeah, what better way? We'll begin with music and we'll end with
Yeah. So
music. So,
Gabrielle,
yeah.
do you want me to play it, Gabrielle, or do you want to play it? So this would be, okay,
Oh,
great.
yeah.
So this piece, by the way, is a wonderful little piece that Ray Fruta created called Vibora El Cascabel, and it was arranged for, you'll see the different instruments. This was the first presentation we did during COVID times, entirely remotely done. And Vigo was in Mexico City, a couple of artists in Mexico City, and then I think Beirut. Amir was in Beirut and Ray was here. So it's a beautiful piece. I enjoyed a lot. So enjoy. Thank you so much. And I am grateful for the opportunity, Lisa, and thank you all.
Thank you so
Take it
much.
away, Gabrielle.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon and see you next week.
Bye.
Bye.